Hello, and welcome to Politics for the People. I'm your host, Michael Striano. Thanks for listening and joining in the conversation. You can find links to our Patreon and Instagram in the show notes and sign up for our weekly newsletter. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts to help others find the show. Okay, let's get to it. We just got through an election like no other, in a year like no other, and now we're facing a constitutional crisis like no other. With absolutely no evidence of voter fraud, President Trump and a handful of his most ardent supporters seem to be putting the cornerstone of our democracy in question simply because they don't like the outcome. Free and fair elections are essential to any democracy, and historically, their undermining has signaled the collapse of that democracy. So how can we try to make sense of this, and what could it mean for our democracy? Let's start in the same place as President Trump, the Supreme Court. Judging by his tweets, he has a profound misunderstanding of how the Supreme Court works and the functions it performs. The court exists to protect the American people from the government exerting power inappropriately. It is not the president's personal court, and it does not serve to protect the president or the office of the presidency. We discussed what the court does do and some of the ways they protect our rights in our recent two-part episode on the Supreme Court. So go back and listen to those episodes for more information. As the president's legal team has worked to begin pushing their cases through the court system, they've consistently run into a significant barrier. They have no evidence. Our legal system places the burden of proof on the plaintiff, meaning those filing the charges must prove their argument. Without this proof, the case will be thrown out by the judge, which is what's happened so far. The only cases that have been decided in favor of Trump involve how close the observers can be while ballots are being counted, allowing them to stand just 6 feet away. So if the president doesn't seem to have a legal argument, why does he think the Supreme Court will hand him the election? Without knowing his legal team's thinking, it would appear they're gambling for a 2000-style ruling, but under extremely different circumstances. The 2000 election between George W. Bush and Al Gore came down to a single state, Florida, and a razor-thin margin of only 537 votes. Such a slim margin involved a recount, and during the recount, it was discovered that the punch card system used by the state was unclear and resulted in a number of votes cast for Gore being counted for Bush. After multiple recounts and legal battles, the Supreme Court stepped in and decided the election 5-4 along party lines. This highly unusual show of partisanship cast the court in a new light as people started seeing it as just another political body rather than nonpartisan arbiters of justice. Of course, there have been times throughout history when the court took a partisan stance, but in 2000 it was largely seen as an apolitical body. The ruling is still seen as a stain on the court's reputation. The differences between the elections of 2000 and 2020 are stark, beginning with the margins of victory. There is no one state giving President-elect Joe Biden an electoral college win. In fact, as of this moment, there are multiple paths to victory for Biden, and he seems to be on track to win with a comfortable lead of over 300 electoral votes. It's not clear where the inconsistencies exist that might be overturned by a Supreme Court ruling, or even what the discrepancy might be. But with Trump doubling and tripling down on his assertions, it feels more and more like he's grasping at straws and would rather put American democracy at risk than accept losing the election. This behavior isn't out of character for Trump, but what is somewhat surprising is the amount of support from notable Republican voices for his baseless claims of voter fraud and invalid election results. You wouldn't expect to hear a party that outperformed their expectations as much as congressional Republicans did dispute the outcome. But that's exactly what we've heard from the likes of Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell. In an election with such a profoundly unpopular candidate as Donald Trump, where you saw the establishment of multiple Republican groups dedicated to defeating their own incumbent, how could the GOP argue split-ticket voters supporting Republicans in Congress while electing Joe Biden as president is an example of massive fraud without discounting their own victories. The questions raised by this bizarre behavior are difficult to research and answer, because there is no precedent, and nothing like this has ever happened in our country. It sounds almost silly to say, but one possible answer is because it's worked before. Not these specific circumstances, obviously, but in recent years, the GOP has relied less and less on objective facts to bolster their arguments. At one point, Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich even claimed feelings are facts, and used that argument to dismiss law enforcement's own statistical data because it didn't feed into his narrative. It's frightening to say, but it would appear the most likely explanation for why Republicans are refusing to accept a loss is because they've done it before and it's worked. A precedent has been established that they just need to push back hard enough, and their supporters will applaud their tenacity and basically fall in line, even at the expense of what actually makes America great: its strong democracy. We've seen fabricated election results enable a consolidation of power by authoritarian leaders, such as Vladimir Putin or the Kim family in North Korea. Even China's recent elections have come under scrutiny, as President Xi took steps to assume a more dictatorial role. What these leaders have in common is a distinct effort to invalidate their opposition and proclaim any result not in their favor as a sham perpetuated against the people by their opposition. They sow the seeds of doubt in election results, then create a narrative to support them before discovering what could loosely be described as evidence to help their case. Now, this is a different episode than we usually produce, but we felt that the election needed to be addressed, and as we researched, we let the facts guide the episode, as we always do. As the information came together, some clear lines were drawn that put Trump's actions more in line with autocrats and dictators than former U.S. presidents. This has never been a partisan show, and we don't intend on transforming it into one, but we do believe facts are facts and should be presented as such. With that in mind, why are we outlining parallels between Trump's actions and autocrats? We've always had a representative democracy, and any democratic government hinges on free and fair elections. There's been concern over election results dating back to 1800 with the election of Thomas Jefferson, when for the first time our governmental fortitude was put to the test, as a political party other than that of George Washington assumed power. Out of fear for what this could mean, Jefferson's predecessor, John Adams, took as many steps as possible to limit the power of the incoming president. Even in 1800, as the outgoing president sought to hamstring the president-elect, the will of the people was never challenged or questioned. Instead, it was respected and accepted, regardless of who won or lost, for the good of the country. Newly elected presidents tend to get an increase in polling after their inauguration, as the country comes together in acceptance of the new family in the White House. This was the common practice until 2016. As the vicious and vitriolic election came to an end, the moral question hung over the country of who are we? One side touted what they saw as patriotism, as the other cringed at what they saw as hate speech flow freely from the lips of arguably the most powerful person on the planet. The winner had lost the popular vote, and his detractors would always regard him as illegitimate, putting a permanent chip on the shoulder of someone famous for holding grudges. The subsequent 4 years would see a steady trend towards bucking norms and dismantling traditional governmental systems. While his supporters accepted his justification that this was needed to set the country on the path to a more functional, efficient government, his opponents characterized it as a consolidation of power as the executive office of the president absorbed various responsibilities. Looking at these divergent storylines, one seems to ring more true when you include the post-2020 election reality of our democracy being undermined. A frightening and dangerous pattern emerges that not only threatens but directly targets the integrity of our elections. It is dangerous and irresponsible to delegitimize our elections simply because you disagree with the outcome. It is frightening that one party is endorsing this behavior, and it will threaten the future of our democracy. if we don't protect it. Thanks for listening, and a special thanks to our patrons on Patreon for your help in making this happen, and all those who have left us a review. Be sure to check out the show notes, where you can sign up for our weekly newsletter and follow us on Instagram at Politics for the People Podcast. Want to help shape the conversation, have a say in episode topics, and get exclusive content, including early access to episodes and live conversations with me? Check the show notes, head on over to our Patreon page, and subscribe for as little as $3. We'll see you Wednesday with our newsletter and Friday with a brand new episode. Take care.